Joining me now with more on Syria's alleged use of chemical weapons is Mann Leverett, a foreign policy professor at American University here in Washington, D.C. As always, thanks for joining us, Hillary. You know, if it's confirmed that chemical weapons were used by either side in this Syrian conflict, could it be a tipping point, or as John McCain mentioned today, a game changer for the international community to act?
I think it's very important to take a step back. It's going to be extremely difficult to confirm if chemical weapons were used, particularly the chemical weapons that is alleged here, sarin. For example, when sarin was used in the Tokyo subway back in 1995, it evaporated so quickly they were able to reopen the subway the next day. So the idea that the sarin is still there, it evaporates very, very quickly. This is the problem with not having the UN inside Syria, not working with the Syrian government to see what happened on the ground. It's going to be very, very difficult to validate whether or not sarin was used. Something else could have been used that's commercially available that would still be chemically based. For example, the intensive use of tear gas or chlorine. But the idea that sarin was used, that's why the White House is very carefully hedging what it's saying. It's saying the reports are largely based on what it calls physiological evidence. Physiological evidence is not real samples of the air or the soil. Physiological samples usually are how someone looks. If their eyes are bloodshot, if they're swollen shut, if there's pus coming from their mouth, all sorts of terrible things that could happen from a range of things, including chlorine or the intensive use of tear gas. It's going to be very hard to corroborate that with real evidence at this point.
Well, if it's so hard, why is it that the U.S. is coming out and saying this, saying, hey, we have some information or we have some sources that tell us this? Why now? What is the timing behind coming out and saying this? Are they trying to publicly force someone to act on this?
Well, I think that's the critical question. The political question really undergirds everything here. And I think it's important to keep in mind that this is coming out while Secretary of Defense Hagel's in the Middle East visiting allies like Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, some of the staunchest foes of the Assad government, those who are arming, training, and funding the rebels in Syria. So I think it's important to keep that political context in mind. The Obama administration does not want to intervene in Syria, but more than not wanting to intervene, it does not want the Syrian government to win. It doesn't want other governments that have argued against intervention, like the governments in Iran, China, and Russia. It doesn't want them to win. And the facts on the ground are that the rebels are losing. They're not able to hold ground. They're not really mounting the effective challenge to Assad that America's allies have called for. And so here's Hagel in the region, in the Middle East, not wanting to get into a public dispute with our allies like Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Emirates. And I think it's important to look at what the political motives and incentives and interests are here.
Well, if you have the U.S. coming out and saying all this, what's to say that even if chemical weapons are being used in that country by either side, what's to stop it from being used again?
Well, what they're arguing here is that, well, first, it's interesting to note that the United States has come out largely in response to what an Israeli general has said. So again, this trip by Hagel to the region, if we come out and say, well, what the Israelis are saying maybe is true, that there is this physiological evidence, how people looked on video of chemical weapons attack, it means the United States doesn't have to get into a public dispute with the Israelis or some of our other Gulf allies. And then the Americans in our foreign policy elite, whether it's in Congress or in the White House, are saying it's very important to take a tough stand with whatever indicia of evidence is out there so that the Syrians will be deterred not to use it next time, the Iranians will be deterred. But if a red line has been crossed, it's been crossed. But there are a lot of things here that we don't know. The ability to prove that sarin was used, why would it be used in such a small amount to affect such a small number of people? Many, many questions that we don't know. And I think the political drivers in American foreign policy are very important to analyze here.
All right, Mann Leverett, we appreciate your time and insight as always.
Thank you very much.